Okay, let me just start off by saying that I know damn well that none of you are going to believe me. After all, at this stage in time, the idea of time travel is just barely moving from something which is shunned by the scientific community and world in general to its infancy of being taken seriously. And you have so many people who do action roleplay as time travelers who truly aren't, even right here on Reddit. Hell, the time travel subreddit is full of them. But regardless of whether you believe or not, I assure you I am a real one. I will say right off the bat that I won't give you my real name for the simple reason that, well, I'm actually alive right now in 2023. To be more specific, the past version of me is alive right now. And I can't afford to let history change for reasons I'll go into in a minute. I also won't get into much information about the future in relation to things such as politics or such. So please don't ask. But I suppose I should give a few rather vague details which may help convince you as time goes on that I'm telling the truth. It may help convince the right people that my warning is real. For starters, less than 2 or 3 decades from now, not only have the cures for cancer and other major debilitating diseases been found, but they can be administered from a simple vaccine shot. In a way, the pandemic we went through helped accelerate their development. We also end up making death itself more of a choice than an inevitability. Life extension research being conducted right now leads to both the ability to live for centuries, if not longer, but also retain our youthful bodies for as long as you wish, which means many of you reading this might still be alive in my time. I was one of those who jumped on the bandwagon after they finished working the bugs out of it. I mean, imagine having the body of yourself in your 20s, with all the knowledge and wisdom you accrue from living so long, not to mention being able to do all the things which a single natural lifetime wouldn't allow. It gets some pushback at first by people who worry about living beyond a natural lifetime. Gasoline is banned by the halfway point of this century, but synthetic fuel means people aren't forced into electric cars, which I was extremely happy about because it meant I could keep driving my Cadillac DeVille around. Although many people get hooked on the flying car craze that happens towards the end of the 21st century. Not me, though. I prefer staying on the ground. Trust me, mid-air accidents are not pretty. However, space travel took off after the Artemis missions put people back on the moon a few years from now for you guys. And once the moon base and spaceport was constructed, well, it was off to the races from there. Vacations to planets like Mars, along with planetary moons such as Europa and Titan, become regular occurrences, even for those not so wealthy. And as for time travel, well, that took a little while longer than anticipated to actually work on. And that's the reason why I'm writing this now. You see, there were many discussions that happened as people began to take time travel more and more seriously, not only to the future, which could already be done with time dilation, but to the past. It almost became as much of a race for every country in the world as the space race in the 60s had been. Everyone wanted to be written into the history books for eternity as the ones who finally invented the ability to travel through time itself. But people weren't really rushing like they used to when they only had a century or less to live. Scientists could work much longer without worrying about retiring or dying. During the first part of this time, I honestly wasn't a part of the endeavors myself. I more or less turned my life around from the second I realized I would be able to live far longer than I thought I would before. I made something of myself, and without getting into too many specific details, I want my identity to remain protected. I will say I became a best-selling author and explorer who did everything from climbing Mount Everest on Earth and Olympus Mons on Mars to using the vast wealth I made from writing and other business endeavors to create underwater cities, similar in design to how Rapture from the BioShock video game looked. I was living my best life from the latter half of the 21st century to the midway point of the 23rd, but there was something that kept pulling away at my mind all throughout it. You see, I'd done so much, checked so many things off my bucket list, but there was one thing that hadn't happened yet. And if you guessed that it was that I wanted to time travel, then congratulations, you've just won a trip for 2 to Europa. Ever since I had been a little child, growing up at the very tail end of the 20th century and the early 21st, I'd wanted to visit the past. I wanted to do things such as attend the 9th annual Cannes Film Festival in 1956, to see Jacques Cousteau's The Silent World, win the Golden Palm Award, see extinct animals such as the Barbary lion and the Tasmanian tiger, and travel across the oceans on the old ocean liners such as the Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth. For starters, that was how they hooked me into funding much of the research. You see, a venture capitalist, whose real name I won't use, but for the sake of telling this we'll call Reynolds, approached me as one of his first big investors. He'd heard me mention my desire to time travel during my book tours. Hell, I'd actually written an entire book series about it. That's why, when he called me that day, I immediately shot straight up in my chair, paying close attention. "Son," he said over the video screen on my desk, "I've known for a long time now that you want to visit the past." I saw a smile break across his face. "Well, what if I told you that we are the ones closest to actually achieving it? And if you're willing to invest a little time and money into my project, that I will allow you to become one of the first to actually travel to the past?" I leaned forward in my chair. "Well, then I would say you now have my attention, Mr. Reynolds." From that moment on, I was hooked. I was brought to his laboratory, where I was, honestly, shocked to find he wasn't lying. They were closer than any of the hundreds of other government or private entities attempting to master it. Even to me, it was extremely complicated to understand, but I'll try and explain what he found in layman's terms. Many scientists right now in this century believe that if you traveled near a black hole, you would experience time dilation. This means 1 year near the edge of one would mean 80 years or so back on Earth. And it was already proven in 2190 when a space exploration which had left at the beginning of the 21st century came back, looking exactly as they had almost a century prior. There's also a theory that black holes could work in reverse, operating as wormholes to both teleport and send people back in time. The issue is, it was found you'd need a particle accelerator almost 1 billion kilometers long, along with a stable wormhole. Both were almost a complete impossibility, until Reynolds' team came up with a discovery. They were not only able to use a particle accelerator much smaller, but they were also able to create an artificial wormhole, a man-made black hole, in their lab. Naturally, many people, myself included, were concerned about this. I asked Reynolds if there were any safeguards to prevent the artificial black hole from rapidly growing on its own. He pointed upwards at the particle accelerator hanging from the ceiling. "Victor, my boy, the particle accelerator has over 90 million sensors monitoring the hole, which, if they detect any kind of anomaly or rapid growth of its own volition beyond our parameters, it'll trigger an emergency shutdown which will zap the hole into non-existence." He slapped me on the back. "You have nothing to be concerned about." I took him for his word at it. So fucking stupid of myself to simply let it go at that. But I was blinded by how close we were to being able to conquer not only space, but time as well. And, in the year 2338, we finally attempted our first use of the artificial wormhole to open a portal to the past. Nothing too far back in time, we decided for a dry run to only go as far back as 1 single year. Everyone, scientists, other investors, even the janitorial staff crowded into the lab's viewing area, anxious to see if the work which had taken trillions of dollars and literal centuries would actually pay off. And it did. To both our utter shock and amazement, the wormhole opened. Through the glass and through it, we could see something displayed on the other end of it. We saw the lab, looking as it had this same time last year. That wasn't what made our jaws drop, though. They dropped because we saw ourselves. I could see myself being led around the chamber by Reynolds and his team, detailing me on the advancements we were now seeing the results of. I turned to Reynolds, finding him staring at the sight before us with such a sense of pride and accomplishment. I felt my own grin begin to stretch across my face. "It's actually possible," I thought ecstatically in my head. "After so many centuries of hoping, it's actually fucking possible." I saw Reynolds turn to me, the man's smile wider than my own. "If that was possible, now do you believe me, Victor?" he asked. For a moment, there was complete stillness in the viewing area, and then everyone burst into cheers and applause. We began shaking each other's hands and hugging each other, congratulating ourselves on achieving first what no one else had been able to. Reynolds then told us to keep what we'd seen under our hats. There was a scientific convention coming up in a few years where he wanted to reveal to the world our achievement. We were all too giddy and too busy basking in our own glory to stop to think about the implications of such a decision. Things such as safety protocols and proper procedures never crossed our minds. That mistake was not only the first major one, but the worst. I don't think what happened would have if we'd revealed our findings right there and then. We hit a few snags after that. You see, we could easily open up a wormhole to a few years back, just as easily to a few decades back. Hell, even a century and a half back took a little more energy but was doable. So was being able to cross from one end of the wormhole in the present to the past and returning. We created a portable version of the particle accelerator and wormhole, which allowed us to move from the present to the past. Theoretically, you could use the portable pad to keep hopping back in time further and further. However, to return to the present, you needed the main unit. No one could find a way to engineer returning into the portable pad. The problem was, the further into the past you wanted to go, the more energy was used, and the larger the wormhole had to be to traverse such a long distance. The particle accelerator began to short out at times, causing us to limit our explorations until repairs could be made. One of the investors, Travis, approached me after a meeting with Reynolds in the spring of 2345 to voice his concerns. What worries me is that, if he attempts to open a portal too far back in time at once, it may short out the safeguards, Vicky said, looking around to make sure he wasn't overheard. Reynolds had put most of us on edge as of late. If I was fixated on visiting the past, then he was utterly obsessed with it. He never let up on why, but the old photo of him and his mother, someone who'd passed centuries ago, gave me a small clue to his motives. But whenever we voiced our concerns now, instead of the placating replies and reassurances, he'd snap and almost seem like was about to hit you. Honestly, I worry about it as well. But what can we do? I whispered back to him. Nobody besides us knows about how far along we are, and if we even try to mention anything to anyone outside of our group, God only knows what he'll do, especially where the reveal is less than 2 months away. Travis took a deep breath. I don't care. This is far too dangerous to keep hidden any longer. Someone has to tell someone outside. And with that, he turned and walked away. I watched him go, unaware that behind me, a tiny remote security bug had been watching us before scampering away. I mulled over his words for about a month and a half, unsure of what to do. Finally, with only a few days until the world reveal, I decided to return to the lab and speak to Reynolds. Unlike the others, the man was still somewhat friendly with me, and I felt still trusting enough to hear me out. I entered the lab using my personal key card, noting that he wasn't in his office. I could tell he'd been here recently, though. The coffee warmer on his desk still glowed slightly red, and the cup beside it still had steam rising out of it. So I turned and headed for the observation area. As I drew closer, I heard voices. I couldn't tell whose they were yet, and I began to slow as I heard what sounded like angry, almost frantic pleadings from one. I froze, feeling a chill run up my spine. Did someone break into the lab? I looked down, seeing a discarded metal pipe from a recent repair job, and picked it up. Feeling every muscle in my body tense up, I hit the button to open the pneumatic doors into the observation room and slid inside. Nobody was in here, but I could now tell the voices were coming from the main room itself. I crouch walked to the glass and slowly peeked over it. What I saw made me nearly drop the pipe. Reynolds stood in the room, almost directly under the particle accelerator. Around him were about 10 or 12 of his personal security team. That wasn't the worst sight, though. Oh God. Travis lay on an old medical gurney, the types you used to see in old mental hospitals from the 20th century. His arms and legs were strapped tightly down, and he struggled to free himself from the restraints. The intercom into the room had been left on, and I could now hear what the voices were saying. Listen, Reynolds. Travis shouted, you don't know what you're doing. The wormhole is too unstable to demonstrate it before a crowd, especially where you want to open it up so far back in time at once. You don't know what'll happen. For a moment, Reynolds stayed silent, then he began to chuckle. It wasn't a normal laugh, though. It sounded absolutely insane. I've seen, quite literally, millions of horror movies in my lifetime, and heard so many insane evil laughs. Hearing one for real, though, made me shudder. He began to speak back to Travis quietly, too softly for me to hear, but whatever he said made a look of complete horror fall over Travis's face. Oh my God, he moaned out. A feeling of dread began to course through me. Even though I didn't know what Reynolds had told him, I knew it wasn't good. The man patted Travis on the shoulder and finally said something I could make out. You'll be the first, Travis, for my own eyes to see before the big reveal, and nothing you, Victor, or anyone else can do is going to stop me." He began to walk towards the exit. "Goodbye, Travis," he said, and then exited the lab. I knew where he was coming now. He was coming to the observation room, and God only knew what he'd do if he found me here. There was only a single door out of the room, though. I knew it was far too late to try and escape through it. The unhinged man was now on his way here and would see me exiting it. A rather large air duct with its cover off for repairs caught my eye, and I set down the pipe as I heard voices approach the door. One thing caught my eye before I climbed up into the vent, an object slouched in a canvas bag, and in the few seconds I had left, I snatched it up, then climbed onto the table in the middle of the room, and finally into the vent. I made it just in time as I heard the pneumatic doors open less than a second later and saw through the opening Reynolds and his goons step in and up to the glass. A moment later, the lights in the lab began to flicker and weaken. Horror as palpable as I ever felt surged through me. He's turning on the particle accelerator to open the wormhole. Through the glass, I saw Travis struggle in vain to break free. Below me, I heard Reynolds let out a low, evil chuckle. Then he turned to the man to his left. "Do it," he said flatly. In response, the man slammed his meaty fist into a red button on the side of the wall, and I had to slap both of my hands over my mouth to keep from screaming. Have you ever heard about something called spaghettification? It's what scientists, both now in this time and in the future, call what happens when a black hole swallows an object in its path, whether it's a star, a planet, or in this case, a person. The wormhole opened, and as it did, Travis began to scream. It was the most pained, agonizing scream I've heard a human being make. As it did, I saw both him and the gurney begin to get pulled toward the opening black hole. That wasn't the most horrible part, though. As he approached it, both he and the gurney seemed to begin to stretch out, and at the same time, compress, as if he was Laffy Taffy being stretched and pulled on a machine. His scream began to sound off, tinny. It rose several octaves. They say that, if a human being was sucked into a black hole, the process of spaghettification would be one of the most horrific, painful ways to die. I can confidently say they were fucking understating the hypothesis. It was all over in a span of about 20 seconds for us, but I knew, for Travis, what had been seconds for us had been an eternity of dying for him due to time dilation. The accelerator was turned off, and the black hole wavered for a moment before vanishing. When it was gone, Reynolds turned to his men. "Ready the plans and items needed for the world reveal. I want everything to be in place for when it's time," he said. One guard nodded. "Yes, sir, we'll have it all ready." The man I'd once considered my partner and friend began to walk towards the door when the guard called after him. "And if Victor should come poking his nose around here while you're gone?" he asked. I felt a fresh surge of fear and horror splash through me as the question was answered. "Then end him the same way we did Travis. I will not have him interfering in this." Actually, he held up a finger. "Don't do that. Go out after this and find him. Put him in my personal jet and put him the farthest distance away. He deserves what's coming almost more than anyone else, and I want him to be one of the last to go." And with that, he turned and strode out of the lab. I couldn't help but shake uncontrollably in the cramped metal space at his words, as the guards gathered some papers and equipment, then left the lab. It took me a long time to climb down from that vent and sneak out of the lab. I was terrified that I'd be caught at any moment, but I managed to make it out unseen. I didn't go back to my home, any of my homes across the world. Actually, I knew there'd be men at all of them waiting for me. Instead, I did something I hadn't in centuries and returned to my poor and humble roots. I first withdrew all the money and gold I could from my bank accounts, knowing I would need it, and ended up taking refuge in an extremely run-down motel in the city, one which advertised itself as an authentic early 21st century motel experience. It was for technophobes, people who were afraid or hated technology, to stay when needing to go out from their homes. While there, I frantically tried contacting anyone I could to warn them, especially after discovering a typed, printed out speech, something I hadn't seen in centuries, stuffed into a pocket of the bag. Most of it related to the reveal speech, but the last part was what caused me to try calling anyone in power in such a panic. Even now, the words of what turned into a twisted manifesto still fill me with such horror I can't describe. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I must end this presentation with a bit of an admission. This device can, indeed, open a wormhole through time. It can allow humanity to traverse time and space, allow us to move freely to the past and future at will, but that was only a side effect. It was not what I secretly designed this machine for in the first place. You see, humanity, to me, as it is now, is abhorrent. It's disgusting, an aberration. It has been ever since I was a child, and had my mother and father educate me on how evil a species we were, to the environment, to each other, and to the universe as a whole. They both became antinatalists in their older age, and passed those views on to me. At first, I didn't understand why they, and those like them wanted, not just humans, but all sapient, sentient life to cease to exist. But as the centuries have gone on, I've come to understand their views. Humans were never meant to live this long. Many of us, both here in the audience and watching at home, were never meant to live as long as we have. We all should have done the right thing and died a long time ago. It's disgusting to let ourselves live on. Every year I kept living was one I hated, but I know I'll never get the majority of others to agree with my views, our views, the antinatalists, and so, in secret, I have worked with them for centuries on a final plan to make the choice for you, for all of us. None of you deserve to keep living beyond today. None of us either. All sapient, sentient life in the universe needs to do the right thing and cease to exist. And none of you deserves to be able to travel through time. This is the moment for humanity, for everything to end, and it's too late to escape. May the universe be bettered by the erasure of all life. Goodbye. And now, I should probably explain why I'm telling you all of this, how I managed to travel back here, why I'm revealing all of these things. It's because I wasn't able to stop Reynolds. I tried desperately for days to get through to anyone in the government, to warn them. I left message after message, but just like the government now, it's such a fucking mess in the future that either nobody got my messages or they were ignored as a hoax, at least not until it was far too late to stop. Because on August 17, 2345, at exactly 2:30 in the afternoon, Reynolds walked on stage in front of millions of people in the audience in the remodeled Los Angeles Convention Center, and with billions more watching all over the world. He revealed his machine, which he'd moved to the center from the lab, and did exactly as the prepared speech had gone. The world gasped as it thought it had opened up a new age in humanity's existence, able to not only reach the stars, but also the future and past. I watched it on the ancient, barely functioning smart TV in my motel room as I frantically prepared. I saw the moment he launched into his manifesto speech. I saw the realization begin to spread over the crowd, the looks of excitement and glee melting into existential dread and horror. A few tried to rush him to stop him, but his guards, ones I realized were also antinatalists, shot them. It didn't matter whether they were men or women. They were shot like animals, with no remorse. And then Reynolds pulled the lever. The screens didn't stay up long, nor did I wait around to watch much, but the little I did will stay burned into my memory for the rest of my existence. The black hole opened, growing rapidly, far more so than I ever saw it do before. It was a runaway black hole, one which might never stop growing. I saw the start of millions of people begin the process of spaghettification, the screams of pain and agony of millions of lives ending at once, to them, drawn out for a literal eternity of horrific stretching and peeling into oblivion, must be what the deepest pits of hell, filled with the damned, sound like. Before the end of the day, Earth was gone, sucked into the ever-expanding black hole. Billions of lives were ended in the most horrific, painful way imaginable, and with no way to even attempt to escape, as all of Earth was inside the event horizon. And for all I know, it kept growing. For all I know, it ate the entire galaxy and is on its way to swallow the entire universe, ending every sapient, sentient thing in existence. I don't know. I never saw it. You see, the thing I grabbed in that canvas bag that day, which sat along with the copy of Reynolds' speech, the thing I saw which made me snatch it up in the first place, was the portable pad. I guess the maniac never thought again about it, seeing as how he never planned for it to be properly used. And as I witnessed the final few moments of his speech, I frantically typed in a random date, a century before, into the wrist-mounted destination selector. I just barely managed to send myself back in time before Los Angeles was obliterated. It's taken me a little while to make it all the way back here to 2023. I didn't dare jump more than a few decades back at a time after that first large jump. I was in untested waters, and I didn't want to accidentally destabilize the wormhole and end up doing to myself what had been done to everyone else. And I found jumping back can physically drain you. It doesn't cause any adverse effects such as cancer or tumors to grow, thank God, but it does tire you out, causing you to sleep for 2 or 3 days straight. And I should explain why I'm here in the first place. First, I have to say I am so sorry. I am so sorry that I was so blind, so easily able to be used for my money to have such an evil plan enacted. I am so sorry that, whether or not I meant for it to happen, I was a part of what happened. I'm so sorry I was allowed, in my pursuit of a centuries-long dream, to become a pawn, but I have a plan to try and prevent that horrific, evil act, one which makes all prior human atrocities look like Tonka toys in comparison, from happening. It will require a sacrifice from me. However, I do believe it will cost me a piece of myself, a piece of my soul. You see, I won't be able to strike and try and kill Reynolds in his adulthood due to the wealth and power he gained from his parents' fortune. I already had thought of that when I landed back in the mid-23rd century, which means, like all those people here online spoke, about wanting to do with some other horrible evil men, dictators, if they got their hands on time travel, No, I cannot bring myself to say it outright. Even for the most evil man in existence, I cannot bring myself to outright say what I feel I must do in the way I must do it. And I know it will be one of the hardest things to live with once I've done it, but it must be done. That is why, before I do this, I am making one final jump back from here to give myself a final chance of peace for a few decades, almost a century. I'm going to give myself one final gift. I'm going to send myself back to the early 1900s. I'm currently collecting vintage cash and more gold, things I couldn't get in my time anymore, to start a new life back then. I'm going to go see the Barbary lion and Tasmanian tiger and all the other long extinct animals. I'm going to go to the Cannes Film Festival in 1956 and shake the hand of Jacques Cousteau, see his amazing film win that award. I'm going to take many oceanic crossing trips on the ocean liners, and I'm going to do much more since the life extension and age reversal therapies will last for another 480 years before wearing off. And all the while, I'll be preparing myself, mentally, emotionally, and physically for the horrific act which I must do to help keep humanity, to keep everything from ending. So all of you, along with your children, grandchildren, and so on, can live long, happy lives for as long as you want. I already wake up screaming almost every night from the horror I saw that last day in the 24th century. I know I likely will scream worse after I do this, but it must be done. I'm only staying here another few weeks just to take in a final look at a time I'd almost forgotten about. So please wish me luck. As morbid as that might be, I do need to warn you of one thing, though. One thing which both worries and scares me far more than any fictional monster or slasher ever could. There is one element of time travel which has been hypothesized but never proven. One that, even after traveling through time, I don't know about. The theory of the multiverse. If someone were to travel back in time and alter the course of history in any large way, it's theorized that, instead of the timeline they're on changing with it, a new, branching timeline would emerge, one where the change occurs, while the other one continues on exactly as it originally did. The person who made the change would never know that they were on the new, branching timeline. They couldn't. I pray to God, one which I still believe in, but so many in my time stopped believing in long ago, that the multiverse theory is wrong, that when I do this, I'll change this universe's fate, this timeline, but if it's right, I'm so sorry for what is to come. Thank you to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan, Tacy, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I look forward to making more content for everyone.